Another day, another story. After a century-long ban, France has legalized absinthe, a potion with a rich history that artists once prized for its supposed hallucinogenic effects. France's green fairy flies again is likely a reference to absinthe, a highly alcoholic and often green-colored spirit with a storied history in France. Welcome to Thibaut Eminent Channel. Absinthe is sometimes called the green fairy, due to its vibrant green hue and its reputation for causing hallucinations and other unusual effects when consumed in excess. Absinthe was banned in many countries, including France, for much of the 20th century due to concerns about its alleged psychoactive properties and potential health risks. However, in recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in absinthe, and it has been legalized in many places, including France. The phrase, "France's green fairy flies again," may suggest that absinthe is making a comeback in France, either in terms of its popularity or its production. It could also be referring to a specific event or development related to absinthe in France. Without more context, it's challenging to provide specific information about what this phrase might be referring to. The origins of absinthe. Absinthe is a highly alcoholic spirit with a long and intriguing history. Its origins can be traced back to the late 18th century in Switzerland, although its development and popularization took place primarily in France. Early development, late 18th century. The exact origin of absinthe is somewhat debated, but it is generally believed to have been created by Pierre Ordinaire, a French doctor who lived in Switzerland. He formulated a medicinal tonic using wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, and other botanicals, which he believed had therapeutic properties. This tonic later became the basis for absinthe. Commercial production, early 19th century. By the early 19th century, commercial production of absinthe had begun in Switzerland and France. Henri-Louis Pernod is often credited with establishing the first absinthe distillery in Pontarlier, France, in 1805. The Pernod brand would go on to become one of the most famous absinthe producers. The Green Hour, mid-19th century, absinthe gained immense popularity in France during the mid-19th century. It became associated with the bohemian lifestyle, and the Green Hour, l'heure verte, became a tradition in which people would gather in cafes and bars to enjoy absinthe. It was often consumed by artists, writers, and intellectuals of the time, including famous figures like Vincent van Gogh and Oscar Wilde. Controversy and bans. Late 19th and early 20th century, absinthe's popularity led to concerns about its effects on health and society. It was blamed for various social problems and was associated with hallucinations and madness, although much of this was likely exaggerated. In the early 20th century, several countries, including France, Switzerland, and the United States, banned or heavily regulated absinthe due to these concerns. Modern resurgence. Late 20th century, absinthe remained largely banned or restricted for much of the 20th century. However, in the late 20th century and early 21st century, there was a resurgence of interest in absinthe. Many countries began to relax their regulations, and absinthe became legal once again. This led to a revival of artisanal absinthe production and a renewed appreciation for its unique flavor and cultural history. Today, absinthe is produced and enjoyed in various parts of the world, including its traditional home countries of Switzerland and France. It is known for its anise flavor and the distinctive green color often attributed to the addition of botanicals like wormwood, fennel, and green anise during the distillation process. However, it is worth noting that modern absinthe is typically less potent than historical versions, as regulations often limit the thujone content, a compound found in wormwood that was once believed to be responsible for its alleged hallucinogenic effects. Absinthe's long history dates back to the ancient Egyptians, who used the drink's most famous ingredient, the flavorful plant known as wormwood, for medicinal purposes as early as 1550 BC. Ancient Greek texts also make reference to wormwood-based remedies, as well as a wormwood-flavored wine called absinthites oinus that may have been the predecessor of modern absinthe. Absinthe as we know it was first distilled in Switzerland by the French doctor Pierre Ordinaire in 1792. 5 years later, a distillery began producing the spirit for medicinal use. French soldiers fighting in Algeria in the 1840s were administered absinthe to ward off malaria and dysentery, which it appears to have successfully prevented in some cases. Wormwood is believed to act as a mild antiparasitic. Returning home from the front, these men sought out the potent cure all in the bars and cafes of Paris, where it had gained a following among bohemians and the bourgeoisie. Absinthe's cup runs over. Throughout the second half of the 19th century, a parasite ravaged France's vineyards, sending wine prices skyrocketing and further kindling the growing rage for absinthe. By 1910, France was knocking back 36 million liters of absinthe per year. Savvy drinkers poured the spirit through a sugar cube placed on a slotted spoon and mixed it with ice-cold water, creating a milky green concoction. Though trendy bars around the world now offer absinthe-based cocktails, this is still seen as the traditional method of preparation. More than any other Parisians, it was the hard-drinking, transcendence-seeking painters and writers who embraced La Fée Verte, the green fairy, as their beverage of choice. Perhaps most notoriously, the Dutch transplant Vincent van Gogh, who frequently depicted absinthe imbibers in his paintings, had an insatiable thirst for the drink that may have contributed to his mental breakdown later in life, and possibly even the infamous ear-chopping incident. His drinking buddies included other luminaries of the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist movements such as Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and, most of all, Paul Gauguin. The poets Charles Baudelaire, Paul Verlaine and Arthur Rimbaud also socialized and wrote under the spirit's influence, a habit that helped solidify their reputations as the enfants terribles of the French literary scene. Visiting artists and intellectuals, among them Ernest Hemingway and Oscar Wilde, who once wrote, "A glass of absinthe is as poetical as anything in the world," began to prize and popularize the green elixir in their native countries. New Orleans' Old Absinthe House became quite the hotspot in the mid to late 1800s, playing host to Mark Twain, Walt Whitman and William Thackeray, among others. After U.S. Marshals nailed shut the doors of the Federal-style townhouse during Prohibition, it reopened in 1933 and was restored to its original glory in 2004. The absinthe craze gets watered down. Van Gogh, Wilde and other absinthe enthusiasts cherish the spirit for its supposed hallucinogenic properties and sensory enhancement. Modern studies have found that thujone, the principal active ingredient in wormwood, can adversely affect cognitive function in the brain, but only in doses much higher than those found in absinthe. As a result, it is now believed that poisonous chemicals in cheaper 19th-century versions of the potion caused the visions reported by absinthe-guzzling bohemians. Like the drink itself, the anti-absinthe movement was born in Switzerland. In 1905, a Swiss laborer named Jean Lanfray murdered his wife and children, reportedly after consuming an assortment of alcoholic beverages that included absinthe. Already concerned about its alleged psychotropic action, temperance advocates seized on the highly publicized crime to garner support for a ban on the drink, which passed in 1907. The United States outlawed absinthe in 1912, and France followed suit 3 years later. Absinthe's resurgence. In 1988, European Union legislation legalized the spirit in all countries provided the level of thujone falls within acceptable limits. The United States lifted its ban in 2007, allowing certain brands to be sold as long as they contain trace amounts of thujone and their packaging does not promise psychedelic side effects. In France, meanwhile, sales have been permitted for the last 20 years, but by decree, the beverage must go by a name other than absinthe, and instead be labeled as a wormwood-based spirit. In mid-April 2011, nearly a century after the country most associated with absinthe forbade the controversial drink, French lawmakers voted to repeal the prohibition. Soon, French distillers already exporting absinthe to other countries and peddling wormwood-based spirits in France will no longer have to label their products differently for the domestic market. Lobbying by absinthe producers and the body of research refuting its legendary hallucinogenic effects helped lift the stigma surrounding the drink and pave the way for the ban's reversal. Absinthe's resurgence in popularity began in the late 20th century and has continued into the 21st century. Several factors contributed to this revival. Legalization and regulation. Many countries that had previously banned absinthe began to lift their prohibitions or relax their regulations. The United States, for example, lifted its absinthe ban in 2007, allowing the sale of absinthe with thujone levels within certain limits. This opened up new markets and opportunities for absinthe producers. Craft distilleries. The craft spirits movement gained momentum in the late 20th century, and many small, artisanal distilleries started producing absinthe. These distillers often focused on traditional production methods, using high-quality ingredients and meticulous distillation processes to create authentic absinthe. Historical interest. There was a growing fascination with the history and culture surrounding absinthe, particularly among cocktail enthusiasts, historians, and artists. Books, documentaries, and articles explored the myths and legends associated with absinthe, adding to its allure. Cocktail renaissance. Absinthe's unique flavor profile, which includes the characteristic anise and herbal notes, made it an appealing ingredient for creative mixologists. Bartenders began incorporating absinthe into cocktails, such as the classic Sazerac and Corpse Reviver No. 2, which helped reintroduce it to a wider audience. Consumer interest. As people became more adventurous in their tastes and sought out unique and exotic beverages, absinthe gained a following among adventurous consumers who wanted to try something different. Tourism. In some regions, particularly in France and Switzerland, the historical connection between absinthe and local culture became a tourist attraction. Distilleries and museums dedicated to absinthe opened their doors to visitors, further boosting interest in the spirit. Online communities. The internet allowed enthusiasts to connect, share information, and discuss absinthe, creating a virtual community of fans and experts who could exchange knowledge and experiences. It's important to note that modern absinthe is typically different from the historical versions in terms of thujone content. Thujone is a compound found in wormwood, a key ingredient in absinthe, and was once believed to be responsible for its alleged hallucinogenic effects. However, modern regulations often limit the thujone content in absinthe to levels that are not associated with such effects. The resurgence of absinthe has transformed it from a controversial and banned spirit into a unique and cherished part of the craft cocktail and spirits world, celebrated for its complex flavors and rich cultural history. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.